Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar on strategies for alleviating policy constraints for exports in select sectors. As my colleague Janvi mentioned, we are privileged to be having the Honorable Commerce and Industry Minister with us. He will be joining us shortly, but in the meantime, we would like to get the webinar started and go ahead. Today's webinar comes at a very interesting time when the global pandemic has led to a widespread decline in output, in trade, as well as in employment. In fact, according to the World Trade Organization, because of the collapse of global demand, world merchandise trade is now set to plummet by between 13 and 32% in 2020. This is quite unprecedented. In fact, this current slowdown in global trade is expected to be even worse than the trade slump which was brought about by the global financial crisis of 2008-09. While the pandemic has significantly impacted international trade, and it has also, for that matter, created large disruptions in global value chains, if we look on the positive side, it has also brought forth opportunities for countries like India to enhance global value chain integration, since major economies are seeking alternative suppliers to build resilient supply chains that are not overly dependent on one or a few countries. This realignment of global value chains actually began even before the pandemic with the trade tension between the United States and China that prompted diversification of production facilities to other developing countries. Now, interestingly, following the COVID-19 pandemic, this push to diversify supply chains has intensified much more. Now, in order to reap the benefits of these changes, we in India need to encourage foreign investment by improving the policy landscape for manufacturing and exports. It is our hope that through this webinar, we will be able to shed some light on some key strategies that can help India's manufacturing and exports to become globally competitive. If we take a look at the recent performance of the manufacturing sector in India, it is indicative of an underlying inertia. The share of manufacturing in India's gross value added declined to just 15.1% in 2019-20 as compared to 18.4% in 2010-11. But this is despite the strong and growing private consumption demand in the country. So it is necessary for us to bolster the manufacturing sector in India in order to leverage the demographic dividend, spur economic growth, and importantly, achieve the target of a $5 trillion economy by 2024-25. There is a lot of international attention right now on India's tremendous potential for investment and greater participation in global value chains. But potential will remain potential only. We need to understand that this is the opportune moment to push for rapid progress on structural reforms aimed at boosting manufacturing activities and exports, which will convert potential into actuality. The government of India has already taken a number of significant steps over the last several years and is now aggressively pursuing the mission of an Atmanirbhar Bharat. There is clear evidence that the government's policies to strengthen the manufacturing sector and integrate India into the global value chain are working on the ground. Already, for example, leading mobile phones such as Apple and Samsung have moved a part of their manufacturing and assembly operations to India from countries like China and Vietnam. Naturally, we can confidently expect that several of their supply chain partners who are closely interlinked would also be likely to shift their bases to India, all the more so due to incentives like the production-linked incentive schemes for the electronics sector. Now, while the recent policy announcements would certainly pave the way for economic resurgence, a stronger economic rebound from one of the deepest economic downturns of our lifetimes would entail an in-depth inquiry into the challenges faced by companies in India, deliberation on the strategies for alleviating these challenges, and then action to take this into account. Recognizing the need for a roadmap to address the policy constraints being faced by Indian exporters across different sectors, India Exim Bank has recently concluded a study titled Domestic Policy Constraints for Exports in Select Sectors. This study analyzes the current domestic policy constraints faced by Indian exporters in select sectors, including textiles and apparel, gems and jewelry, automobiles and auto components, electronics with a particular focus on mobile phones, and most important, pharmaceuticals. In the current scenario, what could be more important? Based on an assessment of the challenges in these sectors, the study identifies what are the policy initiatives that could improve operational conditions and efficiency of exporters in these sectors. The study also identifies what are the policies for engendering global export hubs in the country for various products. In doing this study, we have had the benefit of acknowledged experts in the field. This study was undertaken by a fantastic team of experts comprising Dr. Harshvardhan Singh, former Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization, Mr. Rajiv Kher, Distinguished Fellow of RIS and former Commerce Secretary, who also served on Exim Bank's Board of Directors for a time, Dr. Jayant Dasgupta, former Ambassador of India to the WTrade Organization, Dr. Veena Jha, former head of UNCTAD India, and Mr. T.S. Vishwanath, Principal Advisor with APG SLG Law Offices, among others. It has been a learning experience interacting and listening to these experts, and we are delighted to have them with us today to share the findings of the study. Ladies and gentlemen, this study is based on detailed discussions with businesses and other stakeholders, so it is based on empirical reality and will be sharing with us the actual essence of what is on the ground. I am sure that this session will help to amplify the diverse voices of the exporters in various sectors. I hope that the strategies recommended in the India Exim Bank study will be found useful and, more importantly, will be implemented to help build a more competitive and resilient export sector. Once again, a very warm welcome to all of you participating in this sector and in this session, and we look forward to a very, very educative and illuminating session as we go forward. Thank you very much for your attention.
I now request the study team to share the key findings of the study with the participants. Dr. Harshvardhan Singh.
So I'll basically the study explores, it focuses on the domestic policies, domestic constraints to expanding exports, and looks at the overlap between trade policy as a part of industrial policy, and very much part of industrial policy is also investment policy. So there are two reports which are based on a very close look at 6 sectors. Mr. David Raskina had talked about them. One identifies priority areas that need improving for policy. Another examines the relevant policies to establish export hubs in different industries. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, which are the policies the reports focus on? One is those policies which are with a large impact that can be implemented quickly. These we call high priority policies. The others are what we call low-hanging fruits, or policy measures that can be implemented quickly. They would also include those policies which are already being implemented and can be improved quickly because the industry or the exporters feel they are not being implemented properly. And yet another list is policies which have been suggested by government committees or advisory bodies that could be implemented quickly. So one is large impact implemented quickly, and the others are even other policies which can be implemented quickly so that we can get quick results. Please go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay. So in addition to industry specific, there were some policies which were pointed out that need to be looked at very, very quickly. And the government does have the possibility of addressing them. One is that if you compare the vessel handling charges and port charges in India, they are way larger than those with other ports such as Singapore, Shanghai, Colombo, etc. So that's something which really makes our exports uncompetitive compared to other countries. Then the port charges actually cover a lot of services in their ambit, and that charge is once again charged for several services, even though it has been charged already under port charges. When there is a delay in customs inspection after container has been offloaded, and the delay is not due to the importer or the etc. And please remember that imports are very much a part of the value chain and exports from India. So the importer is charged, even though the problem is created by the agency which is responsible for the delay. So that is something which needs to be looked at. The incentive system is completely wrong. Next, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. One complaint we heard across the board was that policies announced by government are not effectively implemented. And this is something which one sees also in reports of committees. If you go back 10 years, there are high-level committees which have recommended policies. You go at this moment, you'll again see the need for the same policy. So this report has actually suggested a management information system and a process to monitor and address the delays. So the other aspect was the delay which takes place in so many different parts of the chain, the supply chain. And especially in a global value chain, the and just-in-time kind of inventory system, every delay causes an increase in your costs, results in contributes to losing a contract. So delays are something which need to be on a very high priority addressed. Second is that in a value chain, there are multiple products, services involved. And to the extent these are governed by different ministries or departments, a high-level coordination committee is required. And this is something which we saw in virtually every sector. We have indices, international indices on ease of doing business, etc. It was suggested that to act in a focused way, it would be good to have an index for ease of doing exports. And this could be focused on priority sectors to begin with. The other thing is to try and see how to improve road and surface transport performance. And we could develop some kind of indices there also to identify key constraints and address them. Next slide, please. Next slide, yeah. Rajiv, I'll give the floor to you now.
Yeah, thank you, Harsha. Distinguished audience, well, this study, the chapter on pharmaceuticals is essentially an effort at distilling whatever is on the table for a pretty long time. Now, as you can see in this slide, there is existing work, and I have a specific attention drawn to a 2008 study that I had coordinated in the Department of Commerce, followed by a 2013 report of the Katoj Committee, which has been implemented in parts now. And finally, the high-level group, which was constituted by the Industries Minister in 2018. Now, there are a plethora of recommendations available, and therefore, if you were to ask me if there are any original suggestions in this recommendation, I may have to think about a few of them. Essentially, it is distilling the of the lot and bringing them here. In order to introduce the sector, I don't think this audience requires me to introduce the sector and the global presence of the pharmaceutical industry of India. But suffice it to say that the pharmaceutical industry in India has two very unique characteristics. The first characteristic is that it is an end-to-end sort of a sector. That means you are present in almost every domain, every subdomain of the sector. You do everything. Secondly, which is more important for in a policy context, is the fact that we are operating at a very small scale, a garage operation, to a conglomerate operation, a large industry operation, and therefore the policy implications are very different at most of the times. Global presence of the sector, I don't have to reiterate. The audience here knows that India is called the pharmacy of the world. The more important point that I need to bring in here is that this role of pharmacy of the world is gradually getting declined. And the decline that we see today is in fact the cause of concern for us, and we'll see in the coming slides why and how to deal with that. And the last 2 points essentially touch upon the very important factor that there is a strong industrial policy connect with the pharmaceutical sector's trade, because more than half of the production of this sector goes abroad. And therefore, it is an important factor that the Department of Commerce or the trade policy establishment should influence the manner in which the domestic sector operates. And lastly, there is a very knowledge sector, and therefore there is a very strong connect between science, technology, and education policy and the manner in which the sector would evolve in the coming days. Next slide, please. This slide is the first of the 2 slides we have in the challenges that the pharmaceutical sector faces. Now, the first one, as you would see, is the missing strategy and aggressive push that is required. We apparently seem to have ignored the fact that the state, the government at different levels played a very crucial role in the evolution of the sector right from the 50s till 1990s or till about 2005, when the intellectual property regime changed as far as patents were concerned. Now, unfortunately, over the last 2 decades, we have seen that while the external sector, that is the department, that I won't like to name departments, but the external sector has been fairly well clued to what is happening globally and has tried to push the growth in the sector. But if you looked at the rest of the domestic sector, it has not had any strategy in place or any aggressive push for the purposes of evolving the sector further and aligning it with the global developments. Second, heavy dependence on imports of basic raw materials. I don't think this point needs further reiteration. We are aware, recently we have gone through this crisis, we are still going through this crisis, 3 billion worth of imports on account of key starting materials and active pharmaceutical ingredients. And unfortunately, 70% of that comes from one country alone. And with that country, we have relations which are growing hot and growing cold. And therefore, there is always a worry that this step of resource material might be shut off at some times or maybe inordinately priced and so on and so forth, which will affect our global competitiveness. Third point, growing international competition. In the last 20 years, there are many other countries which have come neck and neck with us, and they are our competitors now on the global scale. So despite the fact that India maintains its lead, the fact also is that we have very significant competitors. China is amongst the very important competitors. You might be aware that for a long time, China did not have strength in the active pharmaceutical ingredients, but through a very close follow-up on India's growth and formulation, China has now come to a point where it is undoubtedly a leader in the API segment, as well as it is now taking a very critical position vis-a-vis India on formulations. And therefore, there is a cause for us to feel concerned. Fourth point, this is the technology sector. And as we all know, that there is a very, very sharp transition which of manufacturing, in terms of innovations, research and development, and in terms of the value which is added to the pharmaceutical production, moving from chemicals to biologicals. And this is therefore necessary for ourselves in biologicals in a significant manner. Next slide, please. Quality and regulatory gaps, overreach, conflicts, and inefficiencies. And this is a very crucial area. We are aware that we have multiplicity of regulatory institutional mechanisms. We are aware that there is very little consonance in terms of their implementation. There are typical governmental inefficiencies, and there are conflicts of interpretation, etc. Low investment in infrastructure, technology, innovation, and R&D, I don't have to emphasize. We saw in March, on 23rd March, the starting of the program on API manufacturing. We had not seen a major investment in pharmaceutical sector in the last 20 years made by the state. And that shows where we are in terms of infrastructure, technology, innovation, and R&D. Strong trade promotion, but weak trade policy implementation. And this I will explain as we go forward. Strong trade promotion, yes, because the pharmaceutical trade promotion authorities, trade promotion related governance architecture has worked phenomenally well. But then how we have manipulated our trade policy to influence market access, that is a point which we need to understand. And finally, impact of price controls. We are aware price controls are necessary. They are almost in all states, all countries. But the more important point is that price control, the moment it starts impacting your own competitiveness or the value that you draw out of your exports, then it becomes a risky proposition. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Well, these are a set of recommendations because the presentation had to be a very short one with a time constraint. I have not brought in all of them, but broadly the categories of various kinds of recommendations that have been made are here. They can be broadly divided in the bullets that you see there. The first one is institutionalization of a composite governance architecture, and this is very important. Pharmaceuticals, or for that matter, healthcare sector itself is a multidisciplinary sector. Particularly now with the biologicals on the ascent, we see that more and more and newer sectors are coming in. But unfortunately, the typical integration which is required is missing. This is also missing because there is no strategy pharmaceutical sector as such. You are all aware that from 1950s to 1970s till the Patent Act came out, there was a certain strategy to which we were operating upon, which was essentially a nation building sector. And then from 1970 till 2005, when we have to adopt the WTO system, the TRIPS into operation, there was a momentum on account of the patent law and a variety of other ecosystem related developments which had taken place in the country. Now, unfortunately, thereafter, we have not seen a similar kind of a phenomena. Pharma 4, this is a new orientation. I have not carried over by the jargon of Pharma 4, but the more important thing is that technology needs to play a very, very important role. Scales need to play a very important role, and therefore consolidation of industry is an important part. Environmental compliance or responsible manufacturing is an extremely important area. And intellectual property is going to be a center stage over the time as we go along. Next slide, please. Next slide. Now, the first 3 points that I slide were essentially elements of approach to the sector. They essentially looked at the mindset issue and the fact as to how the governance architecture needs to be re-articulated to take the sector from where it is and catapult it into the global league once again. These points, the one you see in front now, are essentially bread and butter or tangible points, and they are extremely important. Investment, I mentioned in the challenges, and here it's very important. The API clusters. Now, while we were carrying out this study, the government came out with the new scheme, the production link scheme on pharmaceuticals, which included fermentation products as well, and also the pharmaceutical park scheme. Now, both of them are, I would say, a move forward. They were required, but it was unfortunate that they required a pandemic to put us into a corner. Having said that, I think what is more important is we need to recognize that clusterization of manufacturing in pharmaceutical is extremely important because it takes care of the common utility costs, common facility costs, which otherwise in a sector which is a high technology, high investment in common facilities, environmental compliances, and so on and so forth, would require a significant amount of investment. So recommendations, significant amount of recommendations go into these kinds of concerns. The second kind of concerns are special tax treatment and unique investment tools. Now we are aware that pharmaceutical as an industry is unique in a that the gestation for pharmaceutical product from conception to commercialization is a much longer time process than it is for many other product areas. And therefore, the fiscal tools which are available, the investment tools which are available need to be appropriately re-engineered. So some of the recommendations are with these kinds of concerns. Aggressive investments in R&D and innovation and reorienting tax policy vis-a-vis R&D. Now, as I already said, this is a sector which is a knowledge-based sector, a technology-based sector, innovation-oriented sector. And therefore, unless there is a promotional investment, not just promotional, but solid infrastructural investments in R&D, we will not be able to achieve the high global ambitions that we have. So some of the recommendations concern these kinds of aspects. For example, tax policy. Now, there has been a proposal for ages on the table of increasing the average weighted reduction in tax treatment on account of R&D or related several measures, but unfortunately, we have not seen them happening. Comprehensive regulatory reforms, including infrastructure. We know that pharmaceutical is an extremely regulated area. In some markets, it's extremely very closely regulated. In some other, it is relatively less. India has a regulatory structure which is still evolving and which has a long way to go. There are many aspects here. There are structural aspects, for example, the status of the regulator himself. There are other aspects which relate to the regulatory processes, the time taken, and many of the points which Harsha mentioned in his general presentation. So this category deals with a lot of regulatory stuff. We are aware also that there is a federated structure. You have a union system and you have a state system of FDA, of the regulators. And there is a lot of conflict. I mentioned in the challenges slide. One of the unique recommendations here is launch of a national action plan for biologicals. Recognizing that biologicals are one area where the global battles in the pharmaceutical sector will be fought. Was an early riser in this area, but unfortunately, very little investments have gone into the sector. Correspondingly, you look at China. China has an output of about $23 billion coming out of biologicals alone. India has about $1 billion. So there is a huge amount of action which is required here. We have proposed a national action plan on biologicals. It has a string of recommendations. It will not be possible for me to take that recommendation one by one, but it is a non-exhaustive list. It brings in several institutional as well as investment, research, capacity building, wide ambit of various disciplines to deal with. Next slide, please. Now this is last. In our conversation with the industry, one factor which came very clearly was that environmental clearances were turning out to be a real villain of the piece. Whether it was interpretation, whether it was number of concerns relating to environmental clearance, governance related issues, whether it was the conflict of interpretation in different institutional mechanisms. And therefore, we have suggested addressing environmental clearances, both in terms of institutional reforms, as well as how to organize them in different levels of governance in a more sharper manner. Trade engagements. Whenever we speak of trade engagements, unfortunately in India, we only think either of tariffs or of FTAs. We do not think of anything else. Now, trade engagement is also a trade cooperative. And this is one area where recognizing two factors. One, that India is a significant power in the pharmaceutical sector, and therefore market access is extremely important. Two, that pharmaceutical sector has willy-nilly got associated with a huge amount of non-tariff barriers. And it is not always that you need an FTA to deal with them. You need cooperative arrangements, you need an MFNI system, you need a global engagement. All of this is important. Now, when I say global engagement, I am not talking merely in terms of one-off meeting. I am also talking of India's presence in WIPO, India's presence in WTO, India's presence in WHO, a whole lot of other health and pharmaceutical related international organizations. So some recommendations relate to them. Traditional medicine is an important area. Unfortunately, we have in the last few years, we have addressed this issue significantly, but somehow we seem to be confused. We still don't know where exactly we are going. So some of the recommendations are contained here, which deal with traditional medicine, but more importantly, they connect us with the recommendations relating to traditional medicine made earlier, as early as 2008. And therefore, I think they are worth taking. Exim credit and SPV, this is something which I have already addressed. I have spoken about the clusterization of manufacturing, not merely in the API segment, but also in formulations and elsewhere. And Exim credit requirement, particularly in the context of the special needs of the pharmaceutical sector and the need for a special purpose vehicle is what is being proposed here. Medical device sector, again, here one of the definitions that is unique is medical device sector is a strongly technology and knowledge oriented sector. And unfortunately, still don't have an institutional architecture involving the major technical institutions in the country. And what is suggested here is an institutional architecture for that kind of an approach. Brand India Pharma did a remarkable work for a very long time. Now, apparently, it's less visible. It's less visible. I think it needs a greater visibility, and greater visibility not in terms of promotional efforts alone, but in terms of the larger campaign to sell India's strategy for global dominance. And lastly, the academia, research, and industry connect. Now, we have spoken about this for ages now, but we still don't have specific pharmaceutical or health-related problems, and their connect with a research institution and how industry comes in terms of contributing to this research, as well as drawing upon the benefits of this research. So a mechanism here has been suggested, which deals with these kinds of concerns. There are many recommendations. There are about 38, which can be grouped into short-term, medium-term, and basically short-term and medium-term. I don't want to get into details. I've already taken too much time. I think that's where I'll stop. Thank you.
Please go to the next slide. Please go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So you'll see that many of these points which were made for pharmaceuticals are also common to mobile phone, electronics, and others. The initial industry feedback on challenges they face on policy is one, what I talked about, policy not implemented properly in expected time delays. They also talked about erratic power supply and the approach of the administration not being towards ease of doing business at all. They pointed out specific places where documents could be simplified. And since they are competing with other countries in getting exports, they basically said that they should get support similar to that which is provided in competing economies. The government has started to do that. PLI is one important example. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we went into a loop of discussions with industries. We got feedback, we looked at that, we then interacted with them again. And we saw that the global firms which are present in India and the domestic Indian firms they have an overlap of some of the demands, but the domestic firms have specific demands which are particular to them. These three: easier access to loans, credit guarantee interest subvention scheme. So government has started working on this. And to develop a domestic ecosystem, it's very important to create a national design ecosystem. So we have clusters, or we are looking at the electronics clusters scheme. But here the focus is particularly on a design ecosystem for mobile farms, which becomes very important. Next slide, please. GST, so one is the common refrain was delay in GST refunds. Then they also pointed out that certain other inputs, GST is not refunded on them, which include services, capital, buildings and capital goods, machinery kind of thing, and also certain activities which are important for exports. There are merchant exporters who actually locate export markets through agents outside, and when they pay, they have to pay GST on the amount, and that GST is not refunded. So they pointed out a need to consider these as part of policies. Then some of the databases, different databases of Government of India do not talk to each other. Point number 3 is an example of that. And sometimes the ICE gate does not function properly. And the exporter said that when it doesn't function properly, they would like the possibility of submitting a manual document for clearance. Next slide, please. One of the largest areas of their concern was several customs practices, and they pointed out specific practices. One point they emphasized was that often changes by customs are notified, and these changes are implemented with a retrospective effect, which is creates the uncertainty which any policy, new policy or new condition, applying it from in retrospective way would create. So that is one. Second, that if they have a problem, they are unable to get redressal from customs, they have to go through courts. So a system which makes it easier to redress problems which they have. Another aspect was that different officials or notifications, they provide different interpretations of the applicable tax conditions. So these interpretations are either ad hoc, arbitrary, or inconsistent. And there's a need to bring consistency in these interpretations. And sometimes it is clearly pointed out and even recognized that there is misclassification in the notification, but the correction, they said, takes a lot more time than what would normally be expected. There is a peculiar problem that the same nomenclature, say connector, microphone, camera, applies to products coming for two different end users, and these are different products, and they may be under different HS categories. But since the nomenclature is the same, the tax which is applied on them, the import duty, is based on an assessment by the customs official, and often the assessment is not in favor of someone who's going to use that input and export it, but it's towards higher revenue base. And this needs to be a special aspect to consider in formulation of policy. Another thing was that often changes in policy are made with an adverse impact on exports. So the strong emphasis was that please, whenever policies are changed, also include in that due examination of implications for exports. Please go next slide. Next slide, please. Please go to the next slide. Yeah. Some very simple things which could create better opportunities, reduce costs. For example, certain labels and standards for certain electronic products. Think of labels. The requirement is very different or compared to the requirement in the main export markets. So one of the instances which were pointed out is that to get it cleared from the Indian part, the exporters put the label as required within India, and sometimes they have to then change the labeling on high seas, creating complications and additional costs. So this is something, a consistency with what is required in our major markets could be there. Similarly, if other countries have practices, they gave the example of Wassenaar arrangement and European countries, and those practices make the exporters of those countries more competitive, then India should also look at that and implement those kind of practices. They particularly pointed out that IGCR rules are not clear and open to arbitrary interpretation, and they specifically gave examples such as capital goods leased or re-exported after use, period of bank guarantee may exceed the life of machinery, etc., where these rules, as they are at present, create problems. And similarly, they talked about the delay in SCOMET permits, which perhaps also happen because of certain information which is sought, which is very difficult for reasons of privacy or reasons of commercial significance, etc., for the exporters to provide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. For pharmaceuticals, it was pointed out the environmental standards. In the case of mobile, they said that the EPR targets are such that they are not practical to implement because of the nature of the product. They are sold unbundled, the location is not limited because people are mobile, and there is a large market for parts of old phones and refurbished phones, etc. So very difficult to meet the kind of targets which are there. And another concern was that penalty imposed is often very highly disproportionate to the violation. In certain cases, the limited violation in one instance led to the stopping of all imports of the company which was concerned. That next slide, please. And that will bring, this finishes the electronics part. Please, Mr. Vishnath.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to focus on the auto and auto component sector. Interestingly, this is one sector which I think already has seen a reasonable increase in exports over the last few years and has been a high technology sector, and has certainly both industry and the government have been working together to try and promote this sector reasonably well. There have been 2 automotive mission plans, which have a vision document that's been coming out, and that is something which has been done jointly by both the government and the industry. And I think one of the reasons why we have seen a growth in, I think this industry has been, there have been very strong, I think, industry advocates in this sector. One is the SIAM, which works for the automobiles, and the ACMA, which works for the auto components. And they both have been pretty strong organizations that have worked. Other than that, the industry itself is reasonably well, I think, structured, and it is in a position to kind of push exports. Also, the fact that many of the large companies across the globe have come and invested in this country has certainly helped in boosting exports too. So when we started the study, we primarily looked at this whole idea of looked at the automotive mission plan of 2016 to 26, and where they said that the aim should be to start making to focus on make in India, and so that it can contribute to about 40% of the manufacturing sector, and also the ability to scale up exports to 35 to 40% of its overall output by 2020. Can we have the next slide? Maybe have the next slide, please. Thank you. As I said that I won't take too much time on this slide. The basic idea was to try and say that we already are doing very well in terms of exports here. We are among the largest in terms of two-wheeler exports. Our car exports also goes to over 175 countries. And auto component industry also, because it moves with the auto, it is done reasonably well. Can we go to the next slide, please? So primarily, I think what we looked at was the fact that India has already been able to become a hub for small cars, and that was a plan that did certainly work in terms of what we wanted to do. And the reason for that, I think, primarily was the fact that we were able to build a reasonable amount of standards into the country. The two things which helped was that we kept the tariffs on auto components at 10%, and we also brought it under a lot of the FTAs. But at the same time, the most important thing that we did do on the issue of the auto and the auto components was to ensure that there are standards which are global standards. And we kept in line with the standards which are available in the rest of the country. So the Bharat Stage 4, Stage 6 is in line with with Euro Stage 4 or Euro Stage 6. And what that helped was the fact that we ensured that those substandard products started coming to the country. Based on that, I think based on all the discussions that we had with various countries, what you see on the screen now are some of the suggestions that came up with industry based on our discussions with the industry. Was first of all, I think what the industry started saying is the fact that since this is a very high technology sector, it was extremely important for us to start incentivizing R&D. And they said that the focus has to be on the four areas of emissions, industry, and electrical mobility. Electric mobility and the use of electronics in vehicles is something which is going to face a huge important thing in the coming time. And they felt that it would be important for the government to start incentivizing R&D. This is something which is already done in a lot of other areas. If you look at the Technology Upgradation Fund, which has been talked about, I'm unable to talk with this with the slides just moving up and down. Can we go to the suggestion slide first? It'll be easier for me to talk. Can we go to the slide which we were working on just now? It is easier for me to talk. Okay. So primarily, the second thing when we looked at was the technology upgradation in terms of what is it that needs to be done. And a third very important issue which the industry was talking about, especially the auto component industry, was the fact that the duties which were there in the products that were coming in, which was being used in the auto component industry, was creating a huge problem. And they were primarily talking about steel, where the duties ranged between 15 to 25%, while the auto component itself was only at about 10%. But one of the most important areas which they did talk about was this whole area of, was the whole issue of FTAs. And what the industry was trying to talk about was the fact that there is a need to look at FTAs which were of interest to industry, and some of the countries that they did mention in terms of looking at those FTAs were South Africa or Chile or Peru, and some of the African countries, Australia, Mexico, and some of the ASEAN countries. The reason for that was that all of these countries, which we do not have an FTA with right now, already had FTAs with other countries, which primarily has meant that they were in a position to kind of also compete with the people in those markets. So that's, maybe go to the next slide, please. And finally, there are also some suggestions on trade facility, which talked about reducing time, and these are some of the other suggestions which had come up. which talked about looking at demolition charges, improving the port facilities and procedural delays, and other areas which they could look at. So, in short, if I may just conclude, the fact is that the auto industry, which is already doing reasonably well in terms of exports, thought that with some kind of a push that it could take in terms of some of the suggestions that have been put in the study, they could certainly reach the vision of reaching a far higher export than where they are right now.
Thank you very much, David, for organizing this virtual interaction with such eminent personalities. Mr. Kher, Dandas Gupta, Dr. Harshvardhan Singh, Dr. Veena Singh, Mr. Vishwanath, all of them have put in a lot of hard work, put in a lot of, if I may say, labor of love into trying to assess the realistic position about India's exports, how we can truly engage more with the world, expand our global footprint. And when we talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat, I think all of us are very clear that we are not looking at closing India's doors. We are actually looking at expanding our engagement. I was reading Jamshed Forbes in the papers today, speaking about how FTAs are not necessarily bad. They seem bad to us because we've not been able to cash in on those FTAs. We've not really developed domestic capabilities, quality standards, economies of scale. And of course, I must grant that in some instances, countries have also put non-tariff barriers. So it's a mix of both. But clearly, if I may take a little pun on the entire discussion that I saw so far, hindsight is always better than while you're in the job. So after you retire, David, you will give me a lot of gyan about how Exim Bank should be run. Similarly, I hope all those officers of the Commerce Ministry and Industry Ministry who are today listening to this call, please do something about it while you're in the job. Don't wait to retire and then tell us how the job should have been done. And I hope all my colleagues from the ministry who are on the call will take the spirit of the recommendations with positivity, because I find many of the recommendations are doable. The concluding part of your study talks about how a lot of things are happening, but implementation is very poor. And end of the day, while we are in the job, we have to implement. I do hope the report that has come out today will help us to mitigate the bottlenecks, the problems that many of our foreign trade participants are facing, and such free flow of ideas. I've engaged with this team earlier on a couple of occasions on their ideas about the Australia-India trade, on occasions when we've discussed what more policy measures can be taken to further India's competitiveness when we are dealing with the world. I think it's time that we actually start showing that action on the ground, rather than just deliberating on ideas, deliberating on suggestions. As the Prime Minister said, the world today is looking for a trusted, reliable partner. In India, we have that potential. We have the ability, we have the strength to be able to provide a true partnership which can help resilient supply chains become kind of more foolproof. Also have significant engagement with countries which share values of democracy, share values of transparent economic activity with India. So a lot can be done. Atmanirbhar Bharat effectively is all about building Indian capabilities, quality, scale, good manufacturing practices, bringing best of technologies, improving the standards that Indians expect in India. And if you don't make good automobiles for the Indian market, you can never export automobiles. If we get used to cloth which is not of high quality for the Indian market, we'll make mistakes in our export consignments also. And therefore, as Charles Darwin had said, in the long history of humankind, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have always prevailed. Those who remain wedded to the past never really evolve, can never really grow. Our pharma industry is one industry which has done us proud. I was just now hearing about suggestions related to the mobile industry, the electronic component industry. Now, potential in India would be there in several sectors. And I believe you have also tried to identify some of these sectors. My own approach to this is that set the sector right. Don't worry that it's for export or the domestic market. Once you set the sector right, logically you will become export ready also. If we remain wedded to this is a domestic industry, this is an export industry, things are never going to find resolution or solutions. And I have the confidence that in more sectors than at present, India has the capability to expand its engagement. India has the capability to become a global player of significance. We really can't set on the laurels of such low capacities that we are currently producing in India. We really have to look at much, much more deeper engagement with technology, with newer ways of working, with high quality standards that the West has adopted. And I have the confidence that going forward, all of these will collectively help India and Indian industry become a grand success. Too much noise. In some of the suggestions that were made, I think it could have been more practical. For example, suggestions relating to GST should be reduced. That's not the job of this team or the subject matter of our engagement to make India a global exports hub. How does GST have any significance with our becoming a global export hub? We don't need to become lobbyists for those sectors. Our job is to see what that sector needs in terms of greater competitiveness. But as long as the level playing field is there for everybody, I don't think that's going to impact our export competitiveness. It's very easy to say reduce taxes on everything. We'll have to start with reducing the salaries of all the civil servants of India. The ministers have taken a 30% salary cut, not the civil servants. So on a lighter note, I'm saying that. It's very nice and easy to give these kind of comments that reduce GST, reduce this charge, reduce that tax, give more export incentive. I wish some more suggestions would have also come in of where the revenue is going to come for that. Give us the source of revenue and tell us where it can be expended. You are running your Exim Bank. Why don't you reduce the interest rates on everything? A lot of our exports will become competitive. Cut down all your flat, borrow cheaper if you can. Improvise your cash management or your ALM. So these are things which is very easy from the outside to sermonize. I wish in the same report, if a second version and a briefer version can come out, which tells us actionable agenda items, doable largely by the Commerce and Industry Ministry, where we are not running around the whole world trying to get 37 states and union territories on board to discuss about GST reduction. You talked about all imports should be available duty-free for exports. But I thought that's what all of you have done all your life. You've ensured that there are mechanisms for duty-free imports. What I would like you to say is, or find out and give us a way, that our small exporters cannot import. In any case, small quantities cannot be imported. We have a drawback system for that. Can we make that more robust? How do we address the problems and challenges that is faced there? I appreciate the point made that GST refund should be made immediate. That can add 1 to 3%, as your report says, to the cost of our exports. Fair comment. Fully appreciate and endorse that. Can you also apply your mind, given the vast experience that is on the table today, how we will also ensure that fraud is not coming, particularly considering the large number of exporters or people with IEC codes who have recently been found indulging in fraud. And I hope all the illustrious colleagues and all the very, very senior persons who have been involved in this study will take this in the right spirit. I know I have a lot of shortcomings. I know I want to do a lot of things for the better of our export trade. Our exports are stagnating. 10 years, they haven't grown at all. We are where we were 10 years ago. And if we look at how the world has grown in 10 years, we are actually down 30%. So I would really be appreciative or expect how you will tell us the practical ways to engage with latest technology, what kind of testing and testing standards are required, where quality standards need to be further improved in India. And I'm again repeating, in India, exports will automatically happen if our domestic standard is good. Furniture, we believe this is an item where we have huge potential worldwide, but not if our furniture is not made of world class and at scale so that it's competitively priced. I'm told some countries have whole cities and industrial areas where people do only furniture. And a large factory may be doing only tabletops, another may be doing chair legs, third may be doing table lamps, fourth may be doing upholstery, and a fifth may be putting it all together. A lot of things may be exported in knockdown condition, a do-it-yourself type of kit in furniture. Now, we have today the industry ministry, which has set up a team, a steering committee headed by Pawan Goenka, working to identify this. Your committee is identifying certain things. You already have some champion sectors and champion focus thrust areas. I think it's time, if this committee really can help me do that, to bring all of these on one page. Bring the least common denominator. Eliminate where, if you take up a certain product, you take up pens, for instance. Maybe after a whole study of 3 months, 6 months, you may find, no, better to import this pen. We don't have a competitive advantage in making these pens. You may very often jolly well find that medical devices or CT scan machines. Let us continue to import. Doesn't make sense. We need only, say, 300 a year. Let's continue to import. In lieu of that, in India, we need kneecaps, knee implants, heart stents, very large number, 1.3 billion people. Let's create scale, quality in that, become the world's preferred supplier for that product. That truly is global engagement. That is Atmanirbhar Bharat. जो आत्मनिर्भर भारत की आत्मा है, वो यही है. As Michael Porter said, identify where you have a comparative strength compared to the other nations. Identify, focus, and then be nothing but the best in that area. Don't settle for second best at all. I can tell you all the things that we have done, but clearly they are not adequate. We need to do much more. So I have a whole set of points before me which say, we've done this is good about India, this is great, our approach is fantastic. but something somewhere is not right. But I think a dialogue like this, which is constructive, collaborative, which is really for the betterment of the nation as a whole. And in that, there is complete alignment of thought between Rajiv ji, Harshvardhan ji, Vishwanath ji, Jayada, Madam Jha. I think there can be nobody on this call who's not aligned on the ultimate objective. Why can we not aim for $1 trillion of exports from India? We certainly can. I see no reason we cannot. For that, we need to be clear on actionable items. Subsidies are never going to get us there. I'm very, very clear about it. At least in my 6 years of engagement, I have not found subsidies to be the solution to India's problems. I think it's quality, it's technology, it's growth, it's scale. And sometimes for a short period, you may need to give a little thrust or support. But if we are looking at literally running our long-term engagement with the world on subsidy, not going to work out. We'll have to identify areas where sensible policies can help us get there. We'll have to, as the Prime Minister said on 15th August, look at areas where we need to value add, where we can go beyond exporting the raw material, like iron ore. India had 100 million tons of steel, China had 800 million tons of steel. And then, even then, we are, I think, second largest manufacturer. Look at the gap. And we are exporting iron ore to China. I'm told China has iron ore, but they are conserving it. Can we think of some smart options, what we need to do? On FTAs, I heard the last speaker before I came in talk about FTAs with Chile and some African countries and all of that. Can your team come out with a bold idea? What an FTA with US or Europe or UK would be like? Because we need large markets also. We need to penetrate the developed world where we can leverage on our lower labor costs or our skills. When we are going to try and export to Africa and Chile, we'll be competing with people who are already very low cost and very low quality. You want to relegate the nation to that level? I don't think so. Let me throw a absolutely top of the head, ridiculous, stupid idea, if I may. Say, maybe agriculture could be kept out of such an engagement. But suppose the US and India, and US is a large consuming market. Population is also decently large at 400 million. Economy is about 7 times plus ours. So largely consumption. Open market. Not too much competitiveness on their manufacturing. Their strength is innovation, technology, R&D. That's their strength. Suppose I was to say that leave aside agriculture. Because there they have sensitivities, we have sensitivities. They'll never allow peanut butter to come in. We'll not allow milk or dairy to come in. Leave aside some animal husbandry or agriculture. And we say everything else is zero duty both ways. Just out of the box. Can you do a study, a deep down analysis? Can this team work on that? And come up with a possible scenario, what it could mean. What it would mean for our textile sector. What it would mean for our gem and jewelry sector, pharma sector, services sector. But what are the sacrifices it would entail? And we'll import coal from there. Why do we import coal from Indonesia and Australia? We'll import it from US. It's pretty good quality, by the way. We'll import natural gas from the US. We'll import high quality medical equipment from the US. We'll import oil from the US. And many more items. No problem. What is the potential import? What are the threats to domestic industry emerging out of that? But what are the opportunities that will open up to the US? In that, we'll have to take care again of quality in India and non-tariff barriers through quality standards in the US. So that will have to be a detailed engagement with them, the CROs or whatever else. But something more out of the box is called for. Otherwise, David, these are things that I hear in day in and day out. If you're going to be revolving around MEIS and ROSCTL and all of these small stuff, I think I've conveyed what I'm trying to convey. Think a little more out of the box. Take the experience of your 40 years and cumulative experience of this team of maybe few hundred years in different areas, external affairs, commerce, industry, and all the officers I'm sure would have worked in many areas. WTO, Dr. Gupta, Veena-ji in UNCTAD. I mean, you have a wealth of experience, a wealth of exposure. We need something coming out which is much more out of the box as a second version. Of course, you're releasing today's report, but the second version should be like cutting edge, crisp, outcome oriented, less sermonizing, more action oriented. And for the actions, recollecting your constraints when you were in government and factoring that in while presenting your recommendation. That, okay, this has to be given as a subsidy or PLI or whatever. This will be the source from where that money will come. Start from a zero-based budget. Exim Bank, bankers should lend lower cost. These are the actionable items, how they will lend lower. And ultimately trying to move towards non-government interference in your business. To my mind, that's the only sustainable and resilient way to prepare India to engage with the world and look for transformational growth. Incidentally, when we did the LED bulbs program, the first decision on file, was to stop the 100 rupees subsidy that was being paid on an LED bulb, 100 rupees. And my target was that the LED bulb should cost 99 rupees. Double digit, I used to say. It used to become a joke. Most people didn't believe it will happen. Finally, we used to buy those bulbs at 38 rupees. Not from any era-gera company, from Philips. Low quality bulb, better quality than what government was buying earlier. Companies like Philips and Havells and Surya. Instead of 8 watts, 12 watt bulb. Largely assembled in India. Some 3-4 rupees of imports because we don't have chip manufacturing, a fab. 38 rupees. What did the trick? Scale. What did the trick? Timely payment, like you have also rightly said for GST. What did the trick? Marketing through the country, throughout the country, leveraging on existing outlets. What are the outlets? The discoms, the utility offices, the bill collecting centers, the common service centers of METI. Zero overhead. And who did it? A small team of 40 people working in ESL. Target 770 million bulbs in 4 years, 4.5 years. Achievement 1.4 billion bulbs in less than 4 years. All of it is possible. India and Indians have the capability. Starting point, remove that 100 rupees subsidy. Still that is there. Your limiting factor is how much subsidy is available in the year, and you'll not go beyond 600,000 bulbs in a year. So the subsidy you get is only 6 crore rupees. And I think all my esteemed colleagues on this call know about these constraints in government budgets, budget cuts, blah, blah, blah. Let's work around our experience to find solutions which are more, I would say, open market oriented, more focused on non-fiscal ways of encouraging industry and business to expand and grow both domestically and internationally. I again repeat, you cannot segregate the two. You cannot say my auto industry is largely export focused and domestic is not so good. No, the automobile culture, the mindset has to be of high quality. Whether domestic or export, the person working has no clue. He should be made capable and skilled to make a high quality product, irrespective it goes abroad or India. Good manufacturing practices are not segregated for foreign and Indian markets. We need radical change, and no better time than an adversity like COVID. We are willing to bite the bullet. Look at the agricultural reforms, labor reforms, mining reforms, defense reforms, banking reforms, capital market reforms. We are willing to go that extra mile. Prime Minister Modi is willing to expend political capital for the good of the country, for both the midterm and the long term. We welcome ideas, welcome action-oriented suggestions, doable, practical, nose-on-the-ground ideas which can transform the Indian global engagement. I hope nobody will misunderstand any of what I've said, but we'll take it in the right spirit because all of us are together in this. We are all equal stakeholders. Your stake is as much as mine, as much as David's, as much as our children and our people living across the length and breadth of India. Let's go for it. Let's make one more effort, working together in this spirit of success and not sermon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. You have a reputation for plain speaking, which you have totally lived up to. But as you rightly said, sir, we take it in the very best spirit. This study was conceived prior to the COVID pandemic really taking root. So perhaps that is one reason it has aimed in a slightly different direction. But your point is well taken. This is a journey and not a full stop. We will, on completion of this study, go on to the next avatar right away. And we fully take your point, sir. Subsidy is not sustainable in the long run. We need to look at a sector which is not looking at only exports or only domestic, but making competitive sectors all over. And we need to look at the private sector taking a role without being overly dependent on government. For our part also, sir, we will try and make the suggestions and advocacy a lot more practical as we go forward. We really appreciate, sir, you have spent a lot of time with us. I appreciate from your busy schedule, and that has been a big difference. If I can just impose on you for one thing before you go, sir, if we can request that this paper be released at your hands, and we will come back to you for the enhanced avatar as well, with your permission, sir. Dr. Harsh, would you like to maybe add to that, please?
No, definitely, and it's very refreshing, Honorable Minister, your thoughts. And what we have tried to do in this report is also try and come up with something which is practical. So what we could do, in addition to what the Minister said, out of the box kind of thinking, is to try and get a very small short list of the actual practical steps which are quick and easy to implement. So that's something which we could do. But definitely, it's very encouraging to hear what he said, and we look forward to working on those ideas even further and becoming, in some sense, more on the ground, hitting the ground running towards the dynamism which the minister pointed out. So thank you very much.
Honorable Minister, sir, we are not sure about your time schedule. We would not want to keep you for too long. You mentioned that you have to leave. May I thank you once again for taking the time to be with us, sir. It's a testimony to the importance you and the government place on exports and on this strike. It's a matter of encouragement to us, and we greatly appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Rajiv ji. Very, very grateful for all your support. You've always been there whenever we needed you. And I really appreciate Dr. Harshvardhan Singh's role, Dr. Jayant Das Gupta's role, Dr. Veena Jha's active engagement, the work that our principal advisor, Mr. Vishwanath, has been doing to support our export activities. Truly grateful to all the illustrious colleagues on the call. And please remain engaged. I think most of you would have my mobile number. You can take it from my office. Get any bright idea even in the middle of the night. Please feel free to call me up because I'm hungry for ideas. And I'm hungry, as they say, ye dil mange more. Please don't misunderstand. Report बहुत बढ़िया है. अगर मैं तारीफ करते रहूंगा तो उसमें फिर आप और नहीं सोचोगे. I'd rather go for the dil mange more approach.
Sure, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was really heartening to hear the minister speak about the things which are to be focused on. And one of the things which he mentioned, I am just putting up this slide to show how we have been stagnating for the past 5 years. If you go back a little bit more in time, you'll find that we have had this same kind of a picture for the past earlier few years as well. Next slide, please. Janvi ji, next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Sir, on spinning?
Yes. It's now on screen. On spinning, which is really the foundation stone for the entire industry. Now, spinning, we have the second largest installed capacity in the world of 53 million spindles, but actually only 46 million are in working condition. And more than 15 million of these spindles are obsolete. They are more than 15 years old, which need to be modernized. Another 11 million are more than 10 years old and would soon need to be replaced. The second point is that we have not really ventured into the costlier but high quality air jet spindle, and we have given the figures. So we need to modernize and we need to invest more. Now, the linkage with weaving is very clear. We need high quality yarn for shuttleless looms because the speed of the shuttleless looms is also going up. And all this would not be possible for the spinning industry unless we give it priority. Now, the spinning industry was shut out of the Amended Textile Upgradation Fund scheme, ATUF, because it had benefited largely in the previous versions of the fund. Now, this is something which needs to be, this is a matter of a mindset issue, and this needs to change. We need to include spinning also, because unless we improve from the foundation upward, we cannot move further. Next, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Jahnavi ji.
So on my screen, I'm seeing the weaving sector slide, but I think there's some internet issue because of which the
Okay, all right. Just 1 second. On weaving, very simply put, about 78% of our production of fabric is coming from the power loom sector, which is largely dependent on shuttle looms, which are obsolete technology. Even if we consider 75% of the shuttle looms are obsolete completely and need to be changed. The power loom units also do not have scale. For about 385,000 power loom units, we had approximately 24 lakh looms. So it is on an average 8 looms per unit. Now, with this kind of setup, we cannot ensure uniform quality. And the economies of scale, for instance, the output has to be consolidated by people who are using it downstream in made-ups and garments. They have to buy from several of these power loom units, then take the output to a process house. So we need to remove this distinction which is there of trying to have more power loom units in the small scale sector and to prevent larger mills from coming up. And this is something which is the most serious issue which is there. We need to replace our old shuttle looms with shuttleless looms, which is the way the world is moving forward. And for this reason, for modernization, for gaining economies of scale, we need to change the limits for the ATAF scheme. Next, please. If all of you can see the next slide, which is on the process house and processing segment, we have approximately 2,000 process houses. Some of them are large process houses, some of them are in-house process houses owned by the mill, but otherwise they are all small, standalone, independent process houses which have capacity constraints, which have technology constraints, and this is again a pivotal portion, because if we don't want to just export cotton yarn or undyed, unbleached gray fabric, we need to add value. We need good process houses and process houses which will have scale. And the cost of a process house, modern process house, is between 80 crores and 100 crores. So we need to have a similar kind of a scheme like the PLI for process houses and for weaving and spinning. The second point, and this is something which is a cutting, it is an issue which cuts across all the textiles. It is about the differential rates of power. Process houses use a lot of energy. So does spinning and so does weaving. And if we have, for instance, in Maharashtra, there are power loom units and small process houses which get power at, let's say, 3 rupees 20 paise. But if you are a large unit, then you have to pay 7.5 rupees or 8 rupees. That makes it very difficult, and it acts as a perverse incentive to stay small. And that is something which will militate against our gaining global competitiveness, which the minister was also alluding to. So these artificial distinctions need to be removed. Next, please. The next one is about made-ups and garments. And in this segment, again, the basic problem is twofold. One, we don't get good fabrics because the process houses are small. They don't have the modern technology. Second, the output of the fabric units is small. So we have to consolidate. If people are obtaining yarn, for instance, of indeterminate quality from different spinning mills, they are using it in 8 or 10 looms in one unit. And then you consolidate everything and you try to take it to one process unit, which again has small capacity, and in one lot can only do this much. Then when you require fabrics on a large scale for a made-up unit or a garments unit, you can't assure to your client that you are going to deliver something which is of uniform quality. So that is why you don't have large orders, you don't get to service the requirements of big chain stores, and that is a problem which we have to overcome by scaling up and removing the artificial barriers that we have created. The second point is that now the scenario is changing very rapidly, especially after COVID. One of the things which has happened in the international market, especially the developed countries which absorb a lot of our exports, is that formal wear, for instance, is taking a huge hit. People are not buying suits. They are not buying formal trousers. They are asking for athletic wear, leisure wear, and they are just wearing a white shirt, for instance, and a tie, and they are taking part in video conferences and working from out of home. The second point is that people want things very quickly. The turnaround time which our made-ups and garment manufacturers require has been compressed even further, and we will have to therefore address it through our logistics facilities, through our shipping out facilities, because most of the garments and made-ups are exported through ports, and there we cannot afford to have any hold-ups. So these are some of the things, and the final point is about the advanced authorization scheme, which the minister mentioned. The small people don't have access to the advanced authorization scheme. There are many smaller issues about making it user-friendly. Now, the advanced authorization scheme can be utilized in the short to medium term to bring in a lot more of the synthetic fabrics which are made outside, to keep our garment units and made-up units engaged for the entire year. At the moment, our garment units are basically focusing on cotton fabric, and they work for between 6 to 8 months or 9 months at the most. The rest of the time, they are perhaps idling or having very scant orders. So our people are also forced, the people who are working in these units are forced to go back home. Many of them are migrant labor, and they take time to come back. There is a problem which is being faced by the industry on this count. So advanced authorization scheme is one of the areas which we need to address urgently. The last slide, please. Yes. Can everybody see it? This is just the summing up. And I have already mentioned the point that we are stagnating. We are actually slipping in terms of our share of global trade. So unless we take immediate measures, we can't expect this huge chunk, which accounts for about 12 to 13% of our export share, to remain as such. It will keep going down, and it will affect about 4.5 crores worth of numbers of people who are engaged by this industry. Of course, a large chunk of that is catering towards the domestic industry, but a very significant proportion of that 4.5 crore people who are engaged by the textiles and clothing industry are catering to the export demand. So their employment will get affected. It will affect the output of in terms of the GDP, and of course, exports I have already mentioned. So thank you. And the last issue is in the last bullet point. It is about reversing the fiber composition from 70-30 in favor of cotton and synthetic to at least 50-50, if not 30-70, which is the norm for the world in terms of the global market. And we have to, again, diversify, we have to build up scale, we have to have shorter turnaround time. Thank you.
So the first thing that I want to talk about is the problems of exports of cut and polished diamonds. The most important constraint in this sector is basically liquidity. The credit crunch following the Nirav Modi scandal has meant that banks are very reluctant to lend to this sector. Plus, they want a collateral which is more than 100% of the loan. The RBI only gives 3 to 4 months of packing credit. Banks are charging a very high commission on credit cards, so credit card loan is also very difficult for the consumers. Then, of course, there is an increase in tariff on cut diamonds. The GST rates are high and refund is very slow, thereby blocking working capital. The minister told us that we couldn't do much about GST rates. Well, refund is something that certainly can be worked on, and it should be worked on. And what is very important is that customs has changed its practices. So instead of checking only 5% of the consignments, as was done earlier, 15% of the consignments are being checked. And this slows the whole process of exports, because even if one little diamond is found to be bigger than the consignment, than the required consignment size, the consignment is blocked for 6 months and the exporters are unable to export. The last thing has to do with the lab-grown diamonds. The lab-grown diamonds are actually becoming more popular in the foreign market. Therefore, natural diamonds are taking second place. Next slide, please. The next slide is on the problems of gold jewelry. And basically, next slide, please. So I'll continue with the problem. Yeah. Basically, the problem is in balancing the exports and imports of gold. There is a balance required between export and import of gold. And what the exporters say is that this is not warranted, because what happens is people send very bad jewelry. They use gold as an arbitrage, as an interest arbitrage facility. And this really means that the quality of gold jewelry exported is inferior quality, which gets them a bad name. There are also 5 regulatory bodies for gold, and these are too numerous and require a lot of documentation. So their ease is that it should be reduced to 1. And there is no provision for repair of jewelry in the dutiable category of imports. So if gold jewelry is sent back for repair, then the duty is charged again on it. So that makes it very expensive for people to send it for repair. And the gold monetization scheme has led to Hawala as well. Next slide, please. This relates to the specific problems of silver and semi-precious gemstones. First of all, this sector feels there is excessive documentation. They need an export declaration form, as well as a commercial invoice, as well as several invoices on all the inputs. The input imported also needs an invoice. So basically, they say that there is excessive documentation required. And bank charges are discretionary. It should become consistent across all banks. Then the 3D security process of banks makes it cumbersome to do e-commerce, because foreign consumers do not have 3D security. They have only 2D security, and they need to go to a bank to clear it. The courier imports and exports clearance regulation is cumbersome, and courier charges are very high. Technology required for this sector is changing rapidly, and unfortunately, the machines are imported at very high duty. So that makes it very difficult to get the machines on time, as well as they become expensive and substitution is not done on time. Then money retained from exhibitions, because a lot of their sale is done through exhibitions and then following orders are placed. So that they cannot, somehow get. Then imports for exports should be eased, because that's still very difficult. Then a refund of GST to foreign tourists for, in the low value sector of jewelry. A lot of jewelry is bought by the foreign tourists, but they have to pay 16% GST, which does not get refunded, which would get refunded if it were exported. And they actually take it out. In many countries, this is refunded, but not in India. Then exiting SNZs is very, very cumbersome because there is a problem of valuation of land with SNZs, which needs to be cleared. Then under current customs rules, duty-free goods up to $800 are permitted via courier for personal use, but completing the process requires very stringent KYC reforms and 3 KYC forms and 3 or 4 forms have to be filled. Can we go to the next slide, please? Then summing up the recommendations, first of all, what are the low-hanging fruit? The first thing is customs officials should use random sampling for all kinds of jewelry, not just for diamond or gold or for this. It should be 5% as was earlier done and not 15%. Then there should be consistency in documentation requirement of different export-related agencies and ministries, and only one document should be required for exports, not 5 as is required just now. Then import duty on diamonds should be reduced because that is really making it uncompetitive. And it has led to a large fall in, this is for raw diamonds, it has led to a large fall in exports. Then customs duties should be reduced to the previous levels. Even a 2.5% reduction in customs duties makes all the difference to the gold jewelry exporters. Then the process of GST refund should be eased up and government should make it much more transparent. Next slide, please. These are the medium-term policies. Next slide, please, Janvi. The medium-term policies are import taxes on returned consignments should be removed because these are returned consignments or repair consignments. These should be removed. The certification requirement that the same gold has been imported should be used for making the jewelry should be removed. Then self-certification should be allowed for silver and semi-precious jewelry, and they should be customs-free below a certain threshold. The gold monetization scheme should be rethought, and the government should provide the bank guarantee for after looking at the export value of an exporter instead of the trade balance. I think what is very important is that the turnover is increasing in this sector, and that the export value will be an indication of the turnover in this sector rather than the trade balance. And SNZs for rough diamonds should be made. It's now presently in Surat and not in Mumbai, and it's only used for viewing and not for buying. So what happens is that they have to buy, the diamond producers have to buy in Dubai and Antwerp, which costs an additional 2%. So an SNZ in India would also make India a diamond hub. Next slide, please. This is on the long-term policies that could be done. First of all, the commission on credit cards should be reduced to less than 1%. I mean, given that we're moving to digitization, this is the call of the day. Then government should participate in generic promotion of real diamonds because basically the GJEPC has set up a scheme for distinguishing between lab-grown diamonds and the so-called real diamonds. And for this scheme, they are working with De Beers, etc. And they are a little short of funds, and they would require not very much, about 2.8 million or so from the government to be put into the fund to provide a certificate of authentication from India itself, which is recognized in other countries. Then the government could charge or could provide loans at LIBOR plus 300 points for working capital, because working capital is becoming very expensive for this whole sector. And government could put a rupee equivalent of dollars. Basically, when they get their dollars, they could refund the dollars to the government, provided the government is able to advance the working capital loan. And the government should also increase the PAN limit on gold jewelry purchase from 2 lakhs, which is presently there, to 5 lakhs. Many people in the rural area do not have PAN cards, and they are allowed to purchase gold jewelry up to 2 lakhs. But this is, at today's prices, this is nothing. It doesn't even suffice for the minimum jewelry required for weddings. So there is a plea to increase this to 5 lakhs. I just wanted to conclude by saying, that's my last slide. I just wanted to conclude by saying that this sector is not looking for subsidies at all. There is no requirement, not one single paisa of subsidies is required by this sector. This sector only wants better operation, less customs interference, and less, interference on the whole. And then it will be able to go to advance very quickly and rapidly. India is the largest diamond cutting center in the world. It has one of the largest gold producing centers in the world. And even in silver and other things, it's slowly attaining a higher position. So it's very important to ease business practices over here, to ease customs practices over here, refund GSTs immediately, ease the conditions of credit, and move ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next slide, please. This is the last topic, which is, there's a small report on establishing export hubs. And export hubs are actually activities which are run by the firms which manage supply chains or global value chains. These are, in the literature, they are termed as lead firms. What they need is, because they are looking at the entire global value chain, or the value chain which exists within the country, part of the value chain, they need efficient and consistent policies across all parts of the chain, not only like producers of certain kind of inputs who are only interested in their part of the chain. They actually look for consistent policies across the chain. So that is the main difference between those who manage export hubs and those who actually are exporters otherwise. And depends on, these lead firms are normally large players. They could be companies like Apple, or they could be Samsung, etc. in mobiles. They could be companies like Flex in electronics. They could be so in that in different sectors, the presence of lead firms, the origin of lead firms, differs. There are sectors such as mobile, where the main lead firms are global. There are sectors like textiles and clothing, where actually there are multiple firms which manage similar hubs, and we also have merchant exporters. So it's a far more complicated model with domestic players predominant. Likewise, if you see automobiles, if you look at two-wheelers, the dominant lead firms are domestic. If you look at automobiles, it's a combination. So policies and strategies differ across sectors depending on the factors which are crucial for determining what is needed for those who are managing the export hub. The report provides a basic idea about those factors. And because the consistency is required in policies across the different parts of the chain, conceptually two hubs are needed. One which relates to operations, so these are lead firms, and the other one which is managing the policy hub. So just like a global value chain, there has to be a policy chain which is concomitant. So this is something which has been managed quite well in some of the countries which have come up. China is a particular example. Vietnam is another one. There are others also in Latin America, etc., and Europe. So That's another consistency of policies and the lead players in those two chains. Essential to support and facilitate development of a domestic ecosystem. That support has to come from lead firms as well as government policies. So the elements of ease of doing business plus the support which is needed. I talked about a cluster for design, for example. It could be kind of policy which enables just-in-time processing, which requires a specific focus on preventing delay. So another thing which certain lead firms told us is that when they shift to India, they earlier were taking their inputs from sources which their buyers could rely in terms of quality. If they move to the suppliers of similar inputs to from India, they need some time to develop the same kind of confidence. And it is for that limited time period, it's normally 2 to 3 years, where they could actually develop the confidence of their global buyers in the kind of input they're using, that they need some support. And delays, as if you're functioning with value chains, the inventory policy becomes very important, as I'd mentioned. And therefore, anything which causes delay will increase costs. Arbitrary changes in policy increases costs because of risks introduced in the inventory policy. And anything which is announced as a policy with retrospective effects. I gave you an example of customs. It could be other policies also. That also creates a lot of uncertainty and risk and should be avoided. There should be consistency, stability, and predictability of the operating situation. Another aspect was that standards, labeling, marking requirements should not be very dissimilar from the markets where large exports are going to. And this links up with the point which the minister was making, that these standards, labeling, marking could draw upon what the large market is. It could be also for the domestic market as well as export market, but be similar. So these are some of the points, key points. The further detail, of course, is in the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam.
Thank you.
Participants can download the publication freely from the website of India Exim Bank. Due to paucity of time, we will skip the question and answer session. And I would now like to invite Mr. Praladan Iyer, Chief General Manager, India Exim Bank, for his vote of.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Harshavardhan Singh, Mr. Rajiv K, Jayant Dasgupta, Dr. Veena Jha, Mr. Viswanath. Thank you very much for being here and making a lovely presentation. This is my privilege to propose this vote of thanks as we come to close of today's webinar on strategies for alleviating policy constraints for exports on select sectors. On behalf of Exim Bank, first of all, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Honorable Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, for kindly consenting to be here with us today. I also take this opportunity to extend our gratitude to the entire study team for making an insightful presentation. Sir and Madam, your presentation highlighted several priority areas of concerns that are low-hanging fruits and can easily lead to efficiency improvement in the short and medium term. The presentation also has rightly highlighted the medium and long-term interventions that would be required for making production and exports easier and cost competitive. I am confident that this roadmap will help guide policy making and alleviate the policy constraints for growth in exports. I also take this opportunity to extend our sincere thanks to the august audience of representative from the Ministry of Commerce, Department of Investment Policy Promotion, for attending this webinar. We immensely value your active participation during the presentation. Last but not the least, I would like to express my appreciation for the team from India Exim Bank for all their hard work in putting together this event. We sincerely hope that this webinar has been fruitful and insightful for all the participants present here. And I hope this webinar also provided a lot of food for thought to all the stakeholders for designing the broad contours of actionable strategies for enhancing exports from India. We also encourage all participants to download our study, which is available for freely to download from India Exim Bank's website. And we sincerely hope that you will find our study informative and useful. And any queries you have or any suggestions you have on this study, you may please email us. The email address is also given on the website. Once again, thank you all for your participation in today's webinar. Thank you. This webinar is now going to close. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you, Mr. Rafina. Thank you.
Thank you.